You open your eyes in the morning, and something feels strangely familiar. Not just the room, not just the bed, but the way the day feels, as if it's been lived before. The thoughts start racing, the same ones as yesterday, the same worries, the same hopes, the same patterns, looping like a song stuck on repeat. And yet, you read the books, you try the affirmations, you meditate, you plan, you do everything that's supposed to change your life, and still, the same results, the same resistance, the same weight that pulls you back into the reality you say you want to escape. This is not because you're lazy, or broken, or unworthy. It's because you're stuck in what I call the observer loop, a hidden mechanism of consciousness that most people never notice, but it runs their life. And until you break it, your life will keep echoing back the same script, no matter how hard you try to rewrite the ending. So what is the observer loop? It begins with a basic truth. Your reality is not made of things, it's made of perceptions. And the one who is perceiving, the one watching, the one thinking, the one believing, that is the observer. The observer doesn't just see life, it defines life. And most people don't live from presence, they live from observation, not in the conscious sense, but in the habitual sense. They are observing themselves and the world through an old lens, a lens built from past experiences, inherited beliefs, unresolved emotions, and cultural conditioning. And the mind does something fascinating, it mistakes observation for truth. You don't just see your life, you believe your interpretation of life is objective. And so the cycle begins, what you observe becomes what you believe, and what you believe becomes what you create, and what you create reinforces what you observe. It's a closed loop, and like all closed loops, it feeds itself. Every time you say I'm not confident, and observe yourself shrinking in social settings, your brain tags that as truth, and creates more of it. Every time you believe I'm not creative, and observe your blank page in frustration, your brain wires in more resistance. Every time you say I'm just unlucky, and observe another missed opportunity, your system loops the same signal into the field, and the field mirrors it back, not because the universe is cruel, but because it's precise. Your signal is your script, and your script is shaped by the observer you've become. So the real question is not how do I change my life? The real question is who is the I that is observing my life? Because that identity, is the foundation of the loop. And if you don't question the observer, you reinforce the observed reality again and again and again. Let's take an example. Imagine you've always felt ignored growing up. Maybe your voice wasn't heard. Maybe you had to fight for attention. Maybe love was conditional. And now, as an adult, you walk into a room and immediately feel like you don't belong, that you're invisible, that people are judging you. The moment you feel that, your nervous system tightens, your body contracts, your eyes look away, and your tone becomes smaller. And what happens? People mirror that energy. They ignore you, they don't engage, they look past you. And now you say, see, it's happening again, I knew it, and the loop completes, not because it's true, but because you never question the observer who expected it. This is the trickiest part of transformation. The observer always thinks it's right, but in reality, the observer is just familiar, and familiar is not the same as true. You've been rehearsing a version of yourself so long that it feels like the only version available, and your reality has become a mirror, not of possibility, but of past perception. And this is why effort alone won't change your life, because you're trying to fix the observed without shifting the observer, and that is like rearranging furniture in a house you believe is on fire, without checking who lit the match. At the center of your life is not your habits, your job, your relationship, your bank account, your body, your skills. At the center of your life is your observer, and until you meet that observer with radical honesty and loving disruption, nothing will truly change. This is where the loop breaks, not in doing more, but in seeing differently, and the way you do that is not by positive thinking, but by conscious presence, by becoming aware of the moment you start observing yourself through the old lens, and choosing in that moment to interrupt the story. Most people try to change their life with force, with motivation, with pressure, but the real shift happens when you stop being the actor playing the same role and start becoming the director who questions the script. So let's break this down. What does it actually look like to step out of the observer loop? First, you need awareness, and awareness begins with one question: what am I believing right now about myself, about others, about this moment? And second, ask, where did this belief come from? And here's the powerful part. Don't try to fix it, just observe it, because when you observe the observer, you create distance, and in that distance is freedom. The moment you say, I see that I'm observing myself as inadequate, I see that I'm assuming rejection, I see that I'm interpreting the situation as proof that I don't belong, you're no longer trapped in the loop, you've stepped outside it. This is what spiritual traditions have called the witness, the higher self, the one who sees, the one who does not react, the one who chooses instead of repeats. And in that space, you can begin to author a new story, not based on your past, but based on your potential. Because here's what no one tells you, your brain is not a truth detector, it's a pattern recognition machine. It doesn't know what's real, it knows what's familiar. So when you keep repeating old thoughts, when you keep reacting from old wounds, when you keep looping old fears, your brain rewards it because it's safe. And safety always wins over transformation, unless you intervene, consciously, intentionally, compassionately. And yes, it will feel unfamiliar. Yes, it will feel strange because you're rewiring the very identity that created your current reality. But what's more painful, staying in a loop that suffocates your soul, or stepping into the unknown that might liberate it? This is the real work, not self-improvement, but self-remembrance. Self-remembrance is the act of remembering who you were before the loop began, before you inherited the lens, before you believed the lies, before you internalized the voices that said you weren't enough. Because you were never born with those beliefs, you learned them, and what has been learned can be unlearned, not by force, but by truth, the truth that you are not the thoughts you repeat, you are the awareness that notices them, the truth that you are not the identity you perform, you are the presence that chooses it, and the truth that you are not your patterns, you are the permission to interrupt them. The observer loop feeds on unconsciousness, on reaction, on autopilot, and your task is to bring presence where there was once programming, to bring choice where there was once compulsion, to bring breath where there was once contraction. Let's look deeper into how the loop embeds itself in everyday life. Think about your relationships, the way you show up, the type of people you attract, the way you interpret their actions. If you've always felt unworthy, you may gravitate toward partners who confirm that, not because you want pain, but because it feels familiar. And then when the relationship becomes unbalanced, you observe that imbalance and say, see, I knew it, I never get the love I deserve, and the loop deepens. Or take money, maybe you grew up hearing money is hard to earn, or rich people are greedy, or we can't afford that, and now as an adult, no matter how much you try to earn, or save, or succeed, there's a cap, not outside, but inside. Your observer is still looping lack, and that loop filters what you notice, what you believe, what you expect. So even when opportunity knocks, you don't see the door, you see the risk, you see the fear, and you stay in the same financial pattern over and over again. Or maybe it's health. Maybe you've always told yourself, I'm not athletic, I have bad genes, I don't have discipline, and every time you try a new routine, your observer is already predicting failure, already watching for signs that you'll give up. And when your energy dips, when life gets busy, when you miss a day, you don't see that as a normal human moment, you see it as proof that the loop was right, and so you quit, not because you can't, but because your observer told you who you were before you even began. This is how the observer loop becomes a prison, a silent script dictating your potential without your consent. And the worst part is, you don't even know it's happening. You think it's just life, but it's not. It's the lens, and the lens can be changed, not all at once, not with some magical mantra, but gradually, gently, persistently, by becoming the observer of your observer and saying, wait, whose voice is that really? Who taught me to see life this way? Who benefits from me staying in this loop? And what would I be if I let it go? Not just think differently, but see differently, feel differently, respond differently. And this is where your power begins, in that sacred moment between thought and belief, between trigger and story, between reaction and response, where you can pause and choose again. That pause is the crack in the loop. And in that crack the light gets in, the light of possibility, the light of truth, the light of a self that is not defined by repetition, but by revelation. Let's shift the lens now. What if every loop was not your prison, but your portal? What if every time you saw the pattern repeating, it wasn't a punishment, but an invitation? What if the loop wasn't there to trap you, but to wake you up, to show you where you're still asleep, To show you where you've outsourced your vision to old versions of you, the observer loop is not just a psychological glitch, it's a spiritual assignment. It says, here, look at this again, not because you failed, but because you're finally ready to see it differently. And when you do, the loop loosens. It doesn't fight you, freeze you. It says, thank you for noticing, thank you for choosing, thank you for remembering who you are, beyond the roles, beyond the wounds, beyond the repetition. And here's what happens when you start breaking loops. Your nervous system recalibrates, your choices begin to align with your truth, your energy becomes coherent, and reality responds, not slowly, but exponentially, because you're no longer sending mixed signals. You're broadcasting a new pattern, a new identity, a new frequency, and the field can't help but mirror that, because the field is always listening, not to your words, but to your coherence, not to your surface, but to your signal. And when your signal shifts, so does your story. But here's the challenge, the loop will try to pull you back, not out of malice, but out of momentum. The old self doesn't want to die, it wants to survive, and it will whisper, you're faking it, you're not ready, nothing's changed. But that's just the echo, not the truth, the echo of an identity losing power, the echo of a narrative being rewritten, the echo of a cycle that knows its time is up, and your job is to stay steady, to keep choosing the new script, even when the old one feels safer, even when no one around you sees the shift, even when results haven't yet caught up to the resonance, because the observer loop doesn't break with evidence, it breaks with faith, with the willingness to see what's possible before it's visible, to act as if before the proof arrives, to walk as the version of you who already knows how the story ends, and lives accordingly. And this is the key, the version of you who ends the loop isn't more perfect, just more present. They don't wait for the old story to expire, they expire it by embodying the new truth, again and again and again, because repetition isn't just how loops form, it's how new ones are created, deliberate repetition, conscious rehearsal, embodied reminders that say, this is who I am now, not because the world said so, not because the past confirmed it, but because I chose it. And here's the paradox. The more you act from that chosen self, the less you need to prove it, the less you obsess about results, the less you seek validation, because you're no longer observing from lack, you're observing from fullness, and fullness has no agenda. It's not chasing, it's radiating, it's not proving, it's expressing, it's not surviving, it's creating, and that shift from survival to creation is the real escape from the loop. Because now your observer isn't guarding wounds, it's guiding possibilities. Now it's not watching for what could go wrong, it's curating what could go right, and that kind of observer creates a different kind of reality, a reality rooted not in fear, but in frequency, and frequency is the language of the field. It's how reality is shaped, not by effort, but by signal, not by struggle, but by state, and your state is something you can train, not through force, but through focus, not by controlling your thoughts, but by elevating your baseline. Think about it, have you ever walked into a room and felt tension without anyone speaking? Have you ever met someone and instantly trusted or distrusted them? That's frequency, that's the observer behind the words, behind the mask, behind the performance. It's what you really project, and it never lies, and the only way to change what you project is to change what you repeat internally, not just affirmations, but assumptions, not just mindset, but mood set, because your mood is magnetic, your baseline emotion is it. Broadcast, and the field is always mirroring it, not as reward or punishment, but as response. So what are you broadcasting really? When no one's watching, when you're not performing, when you're just being? Are you rehearsing fear or faith? Are you looping shame or sovereignty? Are you expecting resistance or welcoming resonance? This is the inner audit, the inventory that reveals the invisible program. Because if you want to change the loop, you must change the code, and the code is not some mystery, it's the sum of your most repeated thoughts, feelings, and actions. And here's where people get stuck. They try to change the loop externally, change the job, the partner, the environment, but the observer follows them, because the loop isn't out there, it's in here, and until you rewrite the code, you recreate the pattern, even in new places, with new people, under new circumstances, same movie, new actors, same story, new setting, but the loop lives on, unless you interrupt it from the inside. And interruption doesn't mean perfection, it means awareness. The moment you catch the loop playing and say, oh, there it is again, but I'm not going to follow it, I'm not going to feed it, I'm not going to become it, I'm going to pause, breathe and pivot, and in that pivot is power, the power to shift state, to shift story, to shift self, and eventually the loop no longer hooks you, because you've stopped anchoring to it emotionally, and without emotion, the loop dissolves, because it has nothing to feed on. Loops are sustained by emotional reinforcement, by the hit of outrage, by the comfort of despair, by the familiarity of self-doubt. But when you stop reacting, you stop fueling, and when you stop fueling, you stop looping. So train yourself to pause, to get curious, to ask, is this familiar because it's true, or just because it's old, and what else could be true right now that I haven't been willing to consider, not because it feels safe, but because it feels aligned. Aligned with who you're becoming, not who you've been, and that's the bridge between observer and creator, between witness and architect, between repetition and evolution, and you are that bridge. You are the portal through which old patterns dissolve and new paradigms emerge, and that emergence doesn't always look glamorous. Sometimes it looks like silence, like discomfort, like confusion, like letting go of stories that once made you feel safe, but now make you feel small, and that letting go is sacred, because it makes room for what's real, not the fantasy of who you think you should be, but the essence of who you already are, beneath the programming, beyond the loop, before the performance. And when you meet that essence, when you remember that self, the observer shifts from judge to guardian, from critic to companion, from loop to liberation, and your entire reality starts to bend, not from effort, but from coherence. Because coherence is magnetic, it draws people, places and opportunities that match your signal, and repels everything that doesn't, not as punishment, but as purification. And the more coherent you become, the more clear life becomes. Because the loop isn't distorting the signal anymore, the static is gone, and what's left is clarity. Clarity that says, I'm not here to repeat, I'm here to recreate. I'm not here to survive, I'm here to remember. I'm not here to observe, I'm here to choose. And choice is your superpower. The moment you realize you are not at the mercy of past momentum, but the author of future motion, is the moment everything changes. Because now the loop isn't a trap, it's a teacher. It shows you where you've been unconscious, where you've handed over authorship, where you've let automation take the wheel, and instead of judging it, you start studying it. Instead of resenting it, you start rewriting it, because judgment sustains the loop, but observation dissolves it with compassion, and now you become a conscious editor, removing old lines, replacing old scenes, letting dead chapters close, so new ones can begin. And the new chapter is not just about what you do differently, but about who you are while doing it, because the loop isn't broken by action alone, it's broken by identity shift, and identity is not who you say you are, it's who you act like when you're not trying. When you're tired, triggered, unseen, identity is your embodied baseline, your default observer, and when you upgrade that, the loop rewires itself, because the observer is no longer looping from lack, it's looping from love, from truth, from choice, from presence. And here's the twist, presence itself is the only real antidote to the loop, because the loop lives in the past or the future, but presence only lives now, and when you are fully here, fully now, the loop can't run, because the script requires time, it needs you to time travel, back into guilt, forward into fear, but presence is timeless. It interrupts the story, it pauses the playback, it creates a sacred space between stimulus and response, and in that space you meet your power, again and again and again, until the loop is no longer louder than your awareness, and the moment you realize that is the moment you realize the loop was never stronger than you, only sneakier, more familiar, more rehearsed, but not more true. And now you see it clearly, the observer loop is not your enemy, it's your echo. It repeats what you forget, it amplifies what you assume, it exaggerates what you haven't healed, but the moment you meet it with attention instead of aversion, the echo fades, and the essence remains. And the essence is this: you are not your loops, you are not your patterns, you are not your conditioning, you are the one who notices them, and that noticing is liberation, not in theory but in practice. Because when you notice you can name, when you name you can navigate, and when you navigate you can nurture a new signal, and that signal becomes your new observer, your new baseline, your new magnetism, and from there reality doesn't repeat, it reveals, it unfolds, it mirrors your coherence with elegance, not force, because now you're no longer trying to control life, You're collaborating with it, not micromanaging, but magnetizing, not panicking, but presencing, and in that presence a new loop begins, a conscious one, a chosen one, where the pattern is peace, the repetition is resonance, the cycle is creativity, and the result is flow. Because the truth is, you will always be in some kind of loop. The question is it one you inherited or one you initiated? Is it built on your survival or your selfhood? Is it fueled by avoidance or alignment? And only you can answer that, not with words, but with attention, with action, with embodiment. And the more you embody the new signal, the less the old one can find you, not because it's gone, but because you no longer live at that frequency. And this is how timelines shift, not from hustle, but from harmony, not from pressure, but from presence. And presence is a practice, a devotion, a return again and again to the version of you that is already whole, already ready, already enough. And from that place, the observer is not watching for danger, it's witnessing divinity, it's not scanning for threat, it's soaking in wonder. And that shift changes how you see yourself, how you see others, how you see the world, and most importantly, how you see possibility, because loops collapse possibility by showing you the same frames on repeat, but presence expands possibility by opening you to new frames you didn't even know existed. And once you've seen those new frames, you can't unsee them, and once you've tasted a new state, you can't go back to pretending the old one is enough. And that's the beauty and the burden of awareness. It sets you free, but it also holds you responsible, because now you know, and knowing carries weight, the weight of choice, the weight of freedom, the weight of integrity, because when you see the loop and still choose it, that's no longer unconscious, that's avoidance, and your soul feels the sting of that more than anyone else, not because it's wrong, but because it's misaligned, and your soul craves alignment more than comfort, more than validation, more than approval. It wants to live in the loop of truth, not fear, the cycle of clarity, the confusion, the spiral of elevation, not repetition. And elevation is not a straight line, it's a spiral. It brings you back to the same themes, but from higher ground, deeper insight, wider perspective. And each time you return, you choose again from more truth, more awareness, more power, and eventually the old loop dissolves, not with a bang, but with a breath, not with a breakthrough, but with a remembering. And in that remembering, the observer becomes the artist, and your life becomes a canvas, not of constraint, but of creation. And creation is what you were made for, not survival, not sameness, not safety, but aliveness. And aliveness cannot coexist with numbing repetition, with unconscious patterns, with self-made prisons disguised as comfort zones. And yet most people stay in those prisons, not because they're trapped, but because they forgot the door was always open. They forgot that the lock was their own belief, the key was their own awareness, and the escape was never about running, it was about remembering. Remembering that they're not the loop, they're the light behind it, and that light is what reclaims the narrative. It sees the code and rewrites it, sees the trap and transforms it, sees the trigger and turns it into truth. And when that happens, the loop doesn't disappear, it becomes fuel, because everything you've lived, everything you've repeated, everything you've endured, becomes usable now, no longer baggage but building blocks, no longer weight but wisdom, no longer shame but structure. And from that structure you rise, not in spite of the loop, but because of it. And that is the true power of transformation. It doesn't erase your story, it elevates it. It doesn't bypass your past, it blesses it. It doesn't avoid the pattern, it alchemizes it. And now the same loop that once limited you becomes the portal to your power, because the very thing that showed you your unconscious now becomes the ground where you practice your new consciousness. And that's the real miracle, not perfection, not avoidance, but presence in motion, presence in conflict, presence in uncertainty, presence in choice. Because when you're present in the moment where the loop used to take over, you reclaim your reality, and that reclamation changes the game, it changes the rules, it changes the results. Because now you're no longer trying to win an old game, you're playing a new one, and in this new game, the only score that matters is alignment, the only success is integrity, the only outcome is embodiment. And embodiment is when your choices speak louder than your fears, when your actions match your awareness, when your vibration tells the truth, even when your words don't. And that kind of embodiment creates ripple effects, invisible shifts that reorganize your life, Not because you forced change, but because you became the version of you who attracts a different story. And yes, it takes practice, yes, it takes patience, yes, it takes presence, but more than anything it takes permission to stop waiting for clarity and start becoming it, permission to stop blaming the loop and start learning from it, permission to stop trying to predict the outcome and start embodying the signal. And that signal is your power, not your potential, your power. And power doesn't shout, it doesn't beg, it doesn't explain, it simply is. And the more you root in that, the more your loop dissolves into leadership. And leadership is not about control, it's about coherence, being the clearest signal in the room, not the loudest, not the smartest, not the strongest, the clearest. And clarity is magnetic, clarity is contagious, clarity is the compass that ends confusion. And when you become that clarity, the loop can't hold you anymore, because now you see too much, you feel too much, you know too much to pretend that the loop is all there is. And now your awareness is not just a lens, it's a laser. It cuts through illusions, through inherited narratives, through habitual responses, and what's left is truth. And truth doesn't repeat, truth evolves, and that evolution becomes your new loop, a loop of elevation, of alignment, of expansion. And it's not without challenge, but it is without confusion, because you know who you are, you know what you're here for, you know what your signal feels like, and anything that doesn't match it simply fades, not because you force it, but because you no longer feed it. And this is the art of ending the loop. Stop feeding what's no longer true, stop repeating what's no longer real, stop believing what was never yours, and that stopping creates space. And in that space a new reality begins, not someday, not later, but now, because the loop doesn't end in the future, it ends in presence. And presence doesn't require you to fix anything, it simply requires you to feel. And when you feel fully, the loop has no foothold, because the loop is sustained by suppression, by avoidance, by numbness. But feeling burns the fuel of the loop, it clears the static, it resets the system, and now your nervous system becomes your guide, your body becomes your compass, your frequency becomes your map. And with that map, you don't need to force the next step, you just need to follow the signal, the tug, the whisper, the resonance. And that's how reality changes, not by demand, but by design, not through manipulation, but through magnetic alignment. And now the question is not how do I fix the loop? The question is, what am I now available for? What am I now resonating with? What am I now embodying? And from that place, you don't fight the old, you feed the new. You don't resist the past, you rewire the present. You don't fear the loop, you use it as feedback. And feedback is sacred. It's how the field communicates with you. It's how your own energy mirrors itself back to you. And when you see that, everything becomes usable, nothing is wasted, not the pain, not the pattern, not the pause. And from that place of deep internal permission, you live differently, you love differently, you lead differently, because you are no longer looking for escape, you are looking for expansion. And the loop has served its purpose, it brought you here, it brought you home. Home to the awareness that you've never been stuck, only circling a lesson you were born to master. And now mastery is not a performance, it's a frequency. It's not about doing it perfectly, it's about doing it consciously. And that conscious presence rewrites every step you take, because you're no longer walking through your past, you're walking into your power. And power walks different. It doesn't seek attention, it radiates presence. It doesn't ask for validation, it emanates certainty. Doesn't fight to prove, it simply expresses. And your expression is your liberation, because it no longer bends to what the loop required, it no longer shrinks to fit a former identity, it no longer waits for permission to begin. And that beginning is happening now, not as a rush, but as a rise, not as a sprint, but as a shift, not as pressure, but as presence. Because when you shift into observer consciousness, you realize something radical. The loop is not the enemy, the loop is the mirror. And mirrors don't lie, they reflect. And when you stop reacting to the reflection and start adjusting the source, the mirror shifts. And this is where true power begins, when you stop trying to fix the effect and start addressing the cause. And the cause is always identity, not who you say you are, but who you embody, in silence, in choices, in frequency. Because identity is not a thought, it's a transmission, and that transmission tells the field how to respond. It tells people how to treat you, it tells reality what to reflect. And that is not a burden, it's a superpower, because it means nothing is set, everything is signal. And if you change the signal, you change the story, and changing the signal doesn't require effort, it requires alignment, it requires honesty, it requires courage to let go of the identity that loops just because it's familiar, and to step into the identity that frees, even if it's unknown. And yes, the unknown is uncomfortable, yes, the new identity feels unnatural at first, but so did your old one once, and you practiced it until it felt like you, and now you can practice the truth, and the truth is you are not who you were, you are not your wounds, you are not your history, you are the awareness that witnessed all of it, and awareness is fluid, it's creative, it's responsive, and when you bring that fluid, creative awareness to the loop, it cannot hold, because loops require unconsciousness, loops require repetition, loops require identification, but you now see the loop, and what is seen loses power, what is witnessed transforms, and that transformation doesn't happen by trying to be someone else. It happens by remembering who you were before the loop began, and who you were was free, was whole, was infinite, and you still are, you just forgot. And the loop was the forgetting, the awakening is the remembering, and the shift is the return to self, return to signal, return to source, and source doesn't loop. Source flows, and when you live from source, you don't repeat, you refine, you don't shrink, you expand, you don't react, you choose, and that choice is the most radical act of creation you can make, not because it's loud, but because it's real, and what's real ripples, not just in your life, but in the field around you, because transformation is never private, energy moves, and your movement frees others, your coherence clarifies others, your embodiment awakens others, not because you're teaching them, but because you're being you fully, finally, unapologetically, and that being is a frequency, and frequency is how timelines change, not goals, not plans, not strategies, but energy, and energy moves in resonance. And now your life becomes a resonance game. Does this resonate? Does this reflect my truth? Does this amplify my essence? And if not, it's not yours. And that clarity isn't judgment, it's discernment. And discernment is love, because it protects your alignment, and alignment is not a luxury, it's your access point to power. And when you prioritize alignment over approval, over comfort, over certainty, you become unstoppable, not because you control outcomes, but because you no longer need to, and that freedom is what ends the loop, not because you escaped it, but because you outgrew it, and growth is not linear, it's exponential, it moves in spikes, in surges, in waves, and the loop always dissolves in the face of expansion, because repetition cannot hold against revelation, and revelation happens in the space where you pause long enough to ask, why am I still doing this, and wait long enough to hear the answer, and honest enough to feel the truth, and brave enough to choose again, and that is what you're doing now, choosing again, not from fear, not from habit, but from clarity, and clarity leads to coherence, and coherence leads to freedom, and freedom leads to embodiment, and embodiment leads to creation, and creation is the end of the loop, and the start of your life. And when your life becomes creation, you are no longer inside the story, you are writing it, you are no longer trapped in feedback loops, you are generating new signals, new outcomes, new realities, not by force but by flow, because flow is your natural state, and anything that doesn't feel like flow isn't wrong, it's revealing resistance, and resistance is not a failure, it's a flag, it's a message from the body, from the soul, from the field, saying here is where the old identity still lingers, here is where the loop still breathes, here is where love still needs to be brought. And when you bring love into resistance, it melts, because love is the great solvent. The loop cannot survive love, because love is presence, and presence is truth, and truth is freedom. And this is the observer's final evolution, to see not with judgment but with compassion, to act not from pressure but from clarity, to choose not from fear but from wholeness, because wholeness creates wholeness, and now your world begins to reflect what you've always been, beneath the noise, beneath the loop, beneath the inherited identity, a signal, a force, a frequency of life that doesn't need to be earned, only remembered, only received, only revealed, and in that revealing, you become the mirror, you become the permission, you become the presence that shifts the room, not with effort but with essence, not with argument but with embodiment, not with performance but with peace, and that peace is power. It's the power to hold your center when others lose theirs. It's the power to stay grounded when life surges and sways. It's the power to keep choosing resonance, even when the old loop whispers its familiar script. And yes, the whisper might come, and yes, the past might knock. But now you don't invite it in, you don't dress it up as truth, you don't confuse it with safety, you recognize it as what it is, a memory, not a mandate, a habit, not a home, and you gently return, not with fight but with focus, not with drama but with devotion, and this devotion is your liberation, because you are now devoted to truth, to your signal, to the version of you that already exists beyond the loop, the version of you that breathes deeply, moves slowly, loves freely, and acts boldly, not to prove, not to please, but to express, and that expression is not random, it's sacred, it's your soul speaking, it's your path clarifying, it's your life crystallizing into coherence, into beauty, into impact, and that impact isn't measured in numbers, it's felt in presence. It's not about how many people see you, it's about how clearly they feel you, and people feel coherence, they feel integrity, they feel alignment, even if they can't name it, and now you live as that signal, clean, clear, congruent, and from here you don't ask how do I escape the loop, you ask what would the real me create, and then you move, and that movement is your prayer, your declaration, your offering to the field, saying I remember who I am, I reclaim what I carry, I release what no longer resonates, and I walk now as the one who chooses, not from fear but from fullness, not from lack but from love, not from ego but from essence, because essence doesn't loop, essence leads, and you are now leading, not a crowd but your consciousness, not a movement but your momentum, and that is what changes timelines. When you no longer loop to survive, you create to serve. When you no longer repeat to feel safe, you expand to feel true, and truth feels like home. And now you are home, not a place, not a goal, but a way of being, the observer who became the creator, the one who saw the loop and walked out, not by force but by frequency, not by running but by remembering, not by fixing but by flowing, and in that flow, your life becomes the answer to a question the world didn't know how to ask, and your presence becomes the music that rewrites every story still trapped in static, and your breath becomes the gateway through which the infinite finds form, and the loop that once defined you becomes the soil from which your freedom blooms. And now you are the bloom, not someday, not one day, but now.